Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Thank you for joining us. Truly amazing stuff to cover tonight. How wild conspiracies are causing an absolute gun frenzy in this country and how Washington politicians are legitimizing them. Also, a state where the legislature is so out of control, citizens are willing to go to jail in protest of the state's new laws. All that and, of course, Click 3. But first, all right, you might remember this bit of comedy from the White House Correspondents' Dinner on Saturday night when President Obama joked about the criticism he receives over not working together more with congressional Republicans.
Maureen Dowd said, "I could solve all my problems if I were just more like Michael Douglas in The American President." And I know Michael's here tonight. Michael, what's your secret, man? Could it be that you were an actor in an Aaron Sorkin liberal fantasy? Some folks still don't think I spend enough time with Congress. Why don't you get a drink with Mitch McConnell, they ask. Really? Why don't you get a drink with Mitch McConnell?
Today, the president set Washington reporters scrambling with a surprise announcement of a press conference, his first since March, and took a more serious tone, though the theme was familiar. Repeatedly asked about the first 100 days of his second term and his failure to avert the sequester or pass a gun bill, the president disabused reporters of their continued insistence that he has some sort of magic power he is refusing to use that would alter Republican behavior.
You seem to suggest that somehow these folks over there have no responsibilities and that my job is to somehow get them to behave. That's their job. The point is that there are common sense solutions to our problems right now. I cannot force Republicans to embrace those common sense solutions.
There was not a whole lot new about all that until an amazing moment. The questions turned to the issue of Guantanamo, and this is where the president made news today, where he spoke the most passionately and expressed the most palpable frustration with a status quo that he cannot completely control, yet cannot accept. As we have reported on this program, there is a growing crisis in the facility in the form of a hunger strike. And just yesterday, we learned it is getting worse. 100 of the 166 detainees, or 2/3 of the prison population, are now starving themselves, according to Guantanamo officials. 21 of those detainees have lost so much weight, they have been, quote, approved for feeding tubes, liquid supplements provided by tubes inserted through the nose and into the stomach. Detainees are strapped to chairs and force-fed. And now 40 medical reinforcements have been sent to the facility, including nurses and medical specialists. The White House has not wanted to talk about Guantanamo. Really, no one has. But those hunger strikers have forced us all to pay attention. The president's response today was clear. Gitmo must be closed.
It is not a surprise to me that we've got problems in Guantanamo. I think it is critical for us to understand that Guantanamo is not necessary to keep America safe. It is expensive. It is inefficient. It hurts us in terms of our international standing. It lessens cooperation with our allies on counterterrorism efforts. It is a recruitment tool for extremists. It needs to be closed.
After a follow-up question about force-feeding the detainees, the president said emphatically he did not want those individuals to die. He repeatedly came back to the moral imperative to finally deal with the problem.
The idea that we would still maintain forever a group of individuals who have not been tried, that is contrary to who we are, it is contrary to our interests, and it needs to stop. I think for a lot of Americans, the notion is out of sight, out of mind. All of us should reflect on why exactly are we doing this? Why are we doing this? I mean, we've got a whole bunch of individuals who have been tried, who are currently in maximum security prisons around the country. Nothing's happened to them. Justice has been served.
And so, if the president is going to take another run at Guantanamo, then that is news, because he has tried before. Congress blocked President Obama's official policy on Gitmo, which is to transfer some detainees to maximum security facilities in the United States. There are 86 detainees, 86 of the 166 cleared for transfer to a detention facility in another nation or cleared for conditional release in a host nation. Congress has restricted such transfers. However, Congress has also granted the Pentagon the power to waive such restrictions, a power the Pentagon has not yet used in a single case. So, as the president called everyone on the carpet for their complacency today, he also raised the question of whether his administration will try to do more within its power to get at least some of these detainees out of Guantanamo.
I'm going to go back at this. I've asked my team to review everything that's currently being done in Guantanamo, everything that we can do administratively, and I'm going to re-engage with Congress to try to make the case that this is not something that's in the best interest of the American people.
The president may not have some ridiculous supernatural power to impose his will on Congress, but when it comes to the moral and legal crisis in Guantanamo, he is far from powerless. Joining me tonight from Washington, Tommy Vitor, former National Security Council spokesman for the Obama administration. Here at the table, Howard Fineman, NBC News political analyst, editorial director of the Huffington Post Media Group, and Pardis Kebriai, senior attorney at the Center for Constitutional Rights, who recently visited Guantanamo and who represents several detainees there. And Pardis, I want to begin with you. What was your reaction to hearing this from the president today? Surprise, frustration, hope?
You know, Chris, it was encouraging. It was an important statement. But President Obama has made important statements before. And so what we need now is action to follow those very principled words, as he recognized it is not sustainable to hold over 100 people without charge in no man's land in perpetuity, particularly as the United States starts winding down the war in Afghanistan, talks of defeating al-Qaeda. What war are we talking about anymore? So it is not sustainable. It's legally questionable. It's morally wrong. It is unjust. And as someone who's been down to the base and has seen what is happening to these men right now, the answer is not we're going to keep people alive by strapping them into chairs and force-feeding them. There are steps that President Obama can take on his own, starting now.
So that is the question, right? You talked to the White House today,
yes,
Howard. Did they give you a sense of what the content of what those steps, those affirmative steps, might look like?
Well, I asked them, and I got an explanation from an assistant to the National Security Advisor, and what she said is, number one, they're going to reappoint an official at the State Department or appoint a new person at the State Department to take over the role of looking through these cases. That's something that they had let lapse.
Yes. A man by the name of David Freed had overseen this.
Right.
He'd overseen deals with countries to get about 40 or so folks transferred. And he had left and not been replaced.
They had not been replaced, which is significant because the fact that they hadn't replaced them showed where their heart was or not, or where their actions were. And then secondly, they said, look, we admit that the Pentagon hasn't done enough to look through on a case-by-case basis for possible waivers that the Congress gave the administration power to do. And she said they're going to start doing that very actively. So I think the proof is going to be in the administrative actions. And the key word that the president used that caught your eye and mine was the word administrative.
That's right.
Because he complained the whole time that he can't get anything through Congress.
But that's a given, and
that's a given. We know that. There are things he can do administratively. Let's see who he picks, because there's a balance between the risk of that and the risk that we're losing the diplomatic war around the world.
Tommy, you were just nodding your head when Pardis was giving a litany of the moral crisis that is Guantanamo. You were spokesperson for the NSC. What is your sense of who bears responsibility for this, and do you think this is a stain on the U.S. at this point and on the administration?
Short answer is yes. I mean, I think that this talk of all these executive actions we may or may not be able to take to close Guantanamo makes me a little bit nervous, because the provisions in the defense authorization bill that made it impossible to use funds to transfer individuals to the United States, that made it incredibly difficult for the administration to transfer people overseas to other countries, and by the way, those countries aren't exactly wild about having individuals transferred to them, make this incredibly difficult. I mean, the NDAA, the defense authorization bill, all but made it impossible to close Gitmo. And, ironically, it also rendered the facility completely useless, because we could never send anyone there again because, God forbid, they're innocent. There's no way to get them out. So, at some point along the way, this went from an issue where Republicans and Democrats seemed to agree it was in our national security interest to close this facility. Republicans started to see this as a way to attack the president's national security record, and I actually think it's shameful. And it's sad, but Congress needs to move on this, I think, to make any meaningful action.
That's the line, is that Congress needs to move on it, and it is true that there have been these restrictions put in place by the NDAA. I just want to lay them out for a second in Pardis, and then I want you to respond to Tommy. the Defense Department, the Secretary of Defense, in consultation with the head of the State Department, can sign a waiver saying, but they have to stipulate to a whole variety of things, basically saying there is a low risk of this person, quote, returning to the battlefield. Of course, returning assumes the person was on the battlefield to begin with, which in many cases were probably not the case, right? The people in the White House will tell you, look, we just cannot stipulate. We don't have the work product coming from the intelligence community that will allow us to sign the waiver to do this. It is on Congress's doorstep. What's your response to that?
But there is also another provision that follows those certifications that allows the Secretary of Defense to take other actions to mitigate those risks and ultimately to certify that the transfer is in the national security interests of the United States. I have to say, before these restrictions went into place, before the NDAA was enacted, the United States transferred dozens of people to European countries. It sent 6 people back to Yemen. The sky did not fall.
Right.
There were security concerns at that time. There were arrangements that the administration with the Secretary of State made in consultation with host countries. Those arrangements were worked out. There are people, dozens of people, our clients included, who are living in Portugal, in Albania, in Cape Verde, in France, in Germany.
There's Uyghurs in Palau.
On and on, who are living there, rebuilding their lives without incident. The administration knows how to do this. They've done it before. The NDAA got in the way, but it is not insurmountable.
Chris, can I say that
yes.
We sent our Justice reporter Ryan Riley down to Guantanamo twice in the last few months, and I spoke with him this afternoon. He said the conditions there are just awful. They've closed every common facility. People are isolated. People are dying or close to dying. So we need to remember that as we watch a game of political hot potato here, right, that both the administration and the Congress are complicit in. I think the person I spoke to at the National Security Office this afternoon was frank in saying that they hadn't done enough, that the administration had not done enough to push the envelope on the waivers. And they admit that. They had to admit that once the president said he was going to look at administrative measures again. Well, what are they? Right. They got to do that.
It is not, absolutely not enough at this point to just look at these cases again. There isn't time for that, as Howard was saying. There is a crisis at Guantanamo right now, and the administration spent from 2009 to 2010 reviewing those cases and making decisions, and that's what resulted in the 86
well, it's almost as though they made those decisions on paper in the sure knowledge that they wouldn't carry them out. At least that's the way it looks now.
Well, here's my question to Tommy. I mean, the read on this that I think people who want to see Guantanamo closed and are sympathetic to the president, their read on it is, if the president could wave a magic wand, he would do it, but he's hemmed in by both Congress and also the politics, crucially the politics. Is that basically your read on it, which is that they are worried that they send someone back to Yemen and he gets captured on a battlefield and Lindsey Graham takes to the microphones and it becomes a huge opportunity for everyone to demagogue and the politics of this become terrible?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, Lindsey Graham's title should be demagogue, not senator, because that's all he does these days, whether it's Benghazi or any other issue. It is awful and, sort of has no place in this debate. So a couple things. Yes, the administration did transfer a number of individuals to European countries. That, in candor, that was some of the lowest hanging fruit, the safest individuals, the Uyghurs, some of the people you talked about that were innocent, posed no threat. Now, you talk about Yemen. Yemen, there was a self-imposed restriction on transfers because of political instability. And, you've seen Yemen over that year turn into a hotbed for al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula because President Saleh lost control of the country. Now, the good news is things are getting better under President Hadi. There's more security. We're working better with their forces. But, I mean, it is a real concern, the idea of transferring 56 hardened individuals, maybe some aren't hardened, but 56 individuals from Gitmo back to Yemen with that recidivism risk. It's also a huge onerous provision on the Secretary of Defense to sign a waiver provision basically saying, I have a magic 8-ball and I can tell you that there is no recidivism threat in the future. Now, the president today was clearly angry and he wants his administration to do more, and that's a good thing. So, that's a good sign for everyone on the panel.
Can you just respond to that? Because what it seems like to me is when the dust is settled on this, the intelligence community, members inside the intelligence community, people that are inside the White House, don't want to let go of the fact that if you don't have enough to try someone, you cannot keep them. And yes, there may be some risk. We don't know what people do in the future, but that is risk that you just have to suck it up and take.
I think that's absolutely right. There is no one in the administration who is going to be able to guarantee that these people, or anyone, never commits an act that threatens the United States, its citizens, or its allies, which is the restriction that's written into the NDA. No one is going to be able to guarantee that, and we are making the problem worse by keeping Guantanamo
Congress signed it into law, so we can't ignore that.
I just have to say, President Obama said himself, the costs of keeping the prison open are greater than the complications of closing it. I think with Yemen, we've got to stop looking at that problem as sort of a class of people and look at people individually and make case-by-case determinations of who can be transferred.
Howard Fineman of the Huffington Post, Pardis Kebriai, the Center for Constitutional Rights, and in Washington, Tommy Vitor, thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right, one of the guys leading the charge to gut financial reform is also leading a cadre of Wall Street lobbyists down a luxury ski slope in Park City, Utah. That's next.